Hello and welcome to Nice and Blunt. Time to look ahead to week 6 and put in our waiver claims for this week. So this is my list of must-add waiver claims for week 6. Alright, let's kick it off with running backs because there were a couple key injuries that are expected to bump up a couple players for at least a couple weeks. So the priority, I think, this week is in New York. Devontae Booker moves up the depth chart as Saquon Barkley is dealing with an ankle injury. And the reports are kind of good news, but it looks to be like he's going to miss at least 2 or 3 weeks. So that means Devontae Booker is the workhorse running back for the New York Giants. And in this game alone, he saw 19 touches. He only converted them for 58 yards from scrimmage, so not very good efficiency. However, he scored 2 touchdowns in this game. So the floor is there, the workload is high, and he's going to be a relevant running back too as long as Saquon is unable to play. So if you need a running back, he is my number 1 waiver claim at the moment. However, number 2 would be Darrell Williams of the Kansas City Chiefs, and that's because CEH, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, has a MCL injury, a sprained MCL. And the timeline for recovery from this injury is kind of wide-ranging, maximum 8 weeks, but the average is 6 weeks. So I think for at least a month, the player that you want is Darrell Williams. He's going to get the most touches out of the backfield and be the main goal line back. So he won't get all of the touches. Jerick McKinnon will definitely come in for passing downs. But I think Darrell Williams offers some pretty high upside. You know that the Chiefs are going to score, and there aren't that many other options outside of Travis Kelce and Tyreek. So I think they need to establish some type of ground game, and I think Darrell Williams is going to get a decent amount of work. So I think he is the must-add right behind Devontae Booker. Both of them are priority at the running back position this week. But number 3 is an interesting backup. I think we were all surprised with Samaje Perine's workload this week. 15 touches for 83 yards and a touchdown. Mixon also scored a touchdown, but only on 11 touches for 35 yards. So I think next week it's probably going to be closer to 50-50. And then the week after that, Joe Mixon will reclaim the edge in this backfield. But I don't think that Samaje Perine is going to go away. He was pretty effective on these touches, and the only thing that's going to hold him back is the fact that he was added to the COVID list today. So as long as he's able to suit up for next week, I think he's going to have a pretty relevant role. But there's some question marks with his health at the moment, so I wouldn't say he's a must-add, but definitely a must-handcuff if you have Joe Mixon. So maybe if you don't try and package him in a trade to the Joe Mixon owner, it's possible that they might bite. But otherwise, I just want to address some key handcuffs that I think are definitely worth rostering. A.J. Dillon, only rostered in 55% on ESPN, is definitely worth a look. Now, it was an overtime game, but he saw 12 touches in this game, and he scored the touchdown, 79 yards from scrimmage on those 12 touches. So very efficient for A.J. Dillon, and we know that he would have top 10 upside if anything were to happen to Aaron Jones. So he's not taking the role away from Aaron Jones, but he may be more involved, similar to how Jamal Williams was involved last season. So I think A.J. Dillon is starting to have his own standalone value, but still a must-own handcuff if you have Aaron Jones. Same would go for Sony Michel in the Rams backfield. Darrell Henderson is definitely the clear number 1 as long as he is healthy, but if anything were to happen to him, Sony Michel has one of the highest upsides of all running backs in the NFL. Similar to Alexander Mattison, I think, he would get a massive workload in a really high-scoring, potent offense. So even though he doesn't have great starting value at the moment, he is worth rostering. Right now it's only 49%, which is decent, but I think it should be a little bit higher. And in this game, he did score a touchdown. He got 12 touches for 45 yards, so it's not like he's irrelevant. I think there's a bevy of very important key handcuffs in the NFL that just have massive value, similar to A.J. Dillon, Tony Pollard, these types of players. And then an interesting player to note, Khalil Herbert in Chicago got 18 carries, turned them into 75 yards. No touchdowns though, but this game was against Las Vegas, so I don't really trust it. Las Vegas is really bad at defending the run. But I think what is relevant is his role, because we know that once Montgomery went down, there was going to be more work for the backups, and Damian Williams didn't get all of these touches to himself. He still had a very good workload, but Khalil Herbert was more involved than we expected. So maybe not a must add, but someone to keep an eye on. If you're in a very deep format, then maybe he is worth your attention because 18 carries is a lot. So definitely worth an add to the watch list at the least. And then I'll bring up Alex Collins because we don't know what's going to happen with Chris Carson, whether or not he's going to come back this week. But I got to be honest with you, I'm not excited to start Alex Collins in the next couple of games. He has Pittsburgh at home next week and then New Orleans the week after that. So very bad matchups. And with Geno Smith, the quarterback, I don't think it's going to be as good of an offense as it would be with Russell Wilson. Obviously, that's going to be the case. So I'm just very concerned that Alex Collins is going to get shut down the next couple games. But if he retains that starting role 3 weeks from now, he'll have a decent game against Jacksonville, but then a bye week. So for the next month, I don't think Alex Collins is a good investment. So Chris Carson will definitely come back at some point. So I'm not banking on him anytime soon. Let's move to wide receiver because those are always very important. And I think the must-add priority at wide receiver this week is Kadarius Toney of the New York Giants. There's a bit of question marks, but at the moment, he is the only healthy wide receiver for the New York Giants. And we saw what that means. 13 targets in this game. He turned them into 10 receptions, 189 yards after Kenny Golladay went down early with a hyperextended knee. Sterling Shepard and Darius Slayton are going to come back at some point, but they're out with hamstring injuries, and I don't know if they're going to be 100% right away. So at the moment, Kadarius Toney looks like the most healthy player, but still, you want to monitor his status. I think he's worth a pickup because there's a lot of volume that just opened up in this passing game in New York. And Daniel Jones only has a concussion, so at the most, I think he'd miss only one game, if not miss no games at all. And with all of the injuries in New York, he becomes a very interesting option for fantasy. Going to have a lot of volume if all of those other players are unable to play. So that's why I have him at the top this week. But then in Denver, Tim Patrick, 9 targets in this game. That's pretty big for any player. 7 receptions for 89 yards. So he's putting up decent stats with the workload that he's getting. He'll be the wide receiver 2 for this team until Jerry Jeudy returns, so that does have value. Rondale Moore of the Arizona Cardinals. And I think all of the Arizona wide receivers need to be rostered in a lot more leagues. And I think the player that I want, personally, I was high on him coming into the year, and I believe in his talent long-term, is Rondale Moore. I think as the season goes on, he's going to be more and more involved. And we saw in this game that he got quite a few touches as the other parts of the offense were shut down. So I think Rondale Moore has the most versatility and upside, but they're all pretty volatile. I would also roster AJ Green. I think he's the next player that I prefer, but I think Christian Kirk still has a pretty decently high floor and also some good upside. So all 3 of them are hovering between 28 and 38% rostered in ESPN, and I think that should be closer to 50-60%, if not more. So definitely check for one of them. And then with the injury to CEH, Mecole Hardman just moves up the priority list for targets in Kansas City. In this game, he got 12 targets. He caught 9 of them for 76 yards. So that's not a workload you can bank on every single week. Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill were definitely limited a bit this week. But I think at this point, he's the number 3 option, and I think he's worth being rostered. But obviously, if you're going to play him, it's at your own risk. So that's why he's the last player I'm mentioning on this list. I would rather have any of the players I mentioned earlier, but if you're desperate, he's worth your consideration. And let's talk about tight ends. If you need one, then that means you missed out on Dalton Schultz and Dawson Knox, which is quite unfortunate because they look like clear top 10 tight ends. So I hope you picked one of them up, but if you're pretty desperate at tight end, Hunter Henry, I think, is worth an add. Right now, he's rostered in 36% on ESPN, so not too high. And in the last 3 games, he's seen 19 targets and a minimum of 30 yards receiving in all 5 games this season. So pretty decent floor at the tight end position, and 2 touchdowns in the last 2 games. So he's developing a rapport with Mac Jones, and I think he is the tight end you want in New England. And if you're desperate or in a much deeper format, he is worth your attention. And then these next 2 players, I think you got to be really desperate to pick up, but some of you play in really deep leagues. So Ricky Seals-Jones is going to be relevant and worth a pickup as long as Logan Thomas is on IR. He proved it in this game with 8 targets, so there aren't that many options outside of Terry McLaurin that are healthy at the moment in Washington, and I think Taylor Heineke does like to throw the ball to him. They definitely had a rapport on the practice squad in the second string practices. So I think Ricky Seals-Jones is quite interesting for the next coming weeks. Also, Evan Engram, who's rostered in 30%. With all of the injuries in New York, he moves up the depth chart in terms of targets. So definitely worth your consideration. But I don't believe in him long term. I think once the team gets healthy, he's going to be kind of irrelevant. And then for quarterbacks, there's two who are nearing 50% rostership, but definitely deserve to be backup quarterbacks and rostered in pretty much every format, in my opinion. Sam Darnold, right now rostered only 47%, and Daniel Jones in 44%. When they're healthy, they are definitely top 15 guys. They've been performing as such, and I believe in their upside as well as their floor every single week. Daniel Jones has not been as turnover prone this year, and the rushing stats are reliable. And Sam Darnold is just impressive and really getting it done. This is a high scoring offense, and there's a lot of fantasy potential for Sam Darnold. So they are priorities. But if you need a streamer this week and are pretty desperate, I think Jacoby Brissett against Jacksonville has an interesting spot. Now look, you do need to be desperate in order to pick him up, but my other two favorites are on bye. Jameis Winston is going to be on bye this week. However, if you want a backup that has a lot of upside starting in week 7, he's going to get Michael Thomas back either in week 7 or very close to that. And the next month for him after the bye week looks amazing for fantasy. His schedule, here are his matchups. At Seattle, their defense can't really stop anyone. Versus Tampa Bay, you know they have a bad secondary. Versus Atlanta, a really, really good matchup. And then at Tennessee, a team that is just reeling on defense, almost unable to stop anyone. So I think Jameis Winston has one of the highest upsides at quarterback. You know that the floor is really low and he is risky, but if you're shooting for upside, I think Jameis Winston has a pretty good window the next month following his week 6 bye. And then Trey Lance is also worth rostering. It's not 100% guaranteed that he takes this job from Jimmy Garoppolo, but as they slip further and further out of playoff contention, I don't see why not. If they can't compete for a championship, then why not give Trey Lance the opportunity to develop? And the rushing stats are really eye-popping. 16 rush attempts in his rookie debut. So that's a huge workload, and the upside and the floor is really high with that type of rushing volume. So even though the passing attack isn't really great at the moment with him at quarterback, I'm not really worried about it. But again, he is also on bye. So if you wanted him this week, I don't think you can pick him up. But if you're trying to stash him for later, he's only rostered in 36%. So similar to Jameis Winston, worth a pickup for the future. But then if you need a plug and play this week because of those bye weeks, Teddy Bridgewater is also interesting and has a pretty decent schedule the next month. Now his upside is kind of limited, but the floor is really high. So far he's thrown 7 touchdowns and only 1 interception this season. So the points that he does score are not going to be taken back with Teddy Bridgewater. And pretty soon Jerry Jeudy is going to come back. So another weapon for him and a lot more upside in this offense. But regardless, the floor is really high, and the next month's schedule looks pretty good. In week 6, home to Las Vegas, and then in week 7 at Cleveland, so maybe you don't want him for week 7. However, in week 8, home to Washington, who looks like the best matchup for quarterbacks to stream against this season. And then in week 9, at Dallas, who even though they have been getting turnovers, allow a lot of yards, over 300 in every game this season. So Teddy Bridgewater has some decent upside and is a pretty good backup to have the next month of the season. But lastly, let's talk about defenses. And I think there's 4 who are rostered near 50% or lower who are worth your consideration this week. The Panthers defense is pretty legit. I think that they are worth holding on to the rest of the season, and their upcoming schedule has some good upside. Next week against Minnesota at home, then on the road against the Giants, then at Atlanta, and home to New England. So given how well they've been playing, I think that they are definitely a top 12 defense moving forward, if not even better, and they are definitely worth being rostered in more than 50% of leagues. I also love the Cowboys this week. They're going to be going against New England on the road, and they're forcing so many turnovers, 2 interceptions in every single game this season. And Trayvon Diggs looks like an all-pro cornerback this year. So they've got talent on the defense, and unfortunately they have a bye in week 8, but definitely a plug and play this week, and if you can hold on, then they'll probably be a pretty good streamer the rest of the season. They still have a lot of games in division left on their schedule. I also like the Dolphins this week, going up against Jacksonville, and their schedule the next 6 weeks is kind of interesting. After that game against Jacksonville, at home against Atlanta, but then you wouldn't want to play them against Buffalo, but then you would want to play them against Houston, probably not going to play them against Baltimore, but then after that they got the Jets. So an interesting pickup long term, and in the next 4 weeks they have some streaming upside, but this week they are going to be pretty interesting on the road at Jacksonville. Same goes for the Bengals, who look to have a pretty respectable defense, not as bad as it has been in years past. And this week, they are facing Detroit. So I think they're going to be a top 10 play this week. Definitely a good streamer. But next week, they're facing Baltimore, so you may want to drop them after that. But if you can hold on, they've got the Jets on the road in week 8. So I think the Bengals are an interesting pickup, especially this week, going up against Detroit. They are a good play. All right, so that was all of the 5 key positions. If you have a question about a player that you're considering dropping in order to pick one of these guys up, go ahead and leave me a comment down below. But I hope you won this week in fantasy. I did, and I won pretty comfortably, so that always feels nice. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more content. My name is Adam Riancho, and thank you for watching Nice and Blunt.